The United States Navy has hundreds of Tomahawk cruise missiles deployed across its destroyer and submarine fleet in the Persian Gulf right now. Enough firepower to eliminate every known Iranian coastal defense site in a single coordinated salvo. The targeting data exists, the launch protocols are rehearsed, the platforms are in position, and yet, throughout the entire Hormuz standoff, commanders have deliberately kept those missiles holstered. This isn't political hesitation. It's not diplomatic restraint or fear of escalation. The decision to keep the Tomahawks unfired is deeply, ruthlessly tactical. Because in modern naval warfare, firing your most powerful weapon can actually weaken your position. The restraint is the strategy, and understanding why reveals something fundamental about how deterrence works when your adversaries are watching, learning, and waiting for you to show your hand. If you're interested in military strategy, global power shifts, and the technologies shaping modern warfare, subscribe to the channel and let me know your thoughts below. Every Tomahawk missile that leaves a vertical launch system creates an intelligence signature that can't be hidden. The moment a submarine fires, it compromises its patrol box. The missile breaks the surface, the launch flash is visible, the thermal bloom registers on infrared satellites, and the exact grid coordinates of that submarine are no longer a mystery. For destroyers, the problem is the same. A VLS launch pins that ship to a specific location at a specific time. And unlike carrier-based aviation, where strike aircraft can launch from standoff distances and return to a carrier that's already repositioned 100 nautical miles away, a missile launch is a fixed data point. You've just told your adversary exactly where you were when you pulled the trigger. Iran doesn't need to shoot down the missile to win the intelligence battle. It just needs to catalog where it came from. And in a region saturated with radar coverage, coastal observation posts, and electronic intelligence collection platforms, that's not difficult. The launch gives away the platform, and once the platform is exposed, the entire operational calculus changes. Submarines lose their greatest advantage: invisibility. Surface ships become predictable. The very act of firing compromises the flexibility that makes the Navy lethal in the first place. But the real problem isn't Iranian retaliation. It's the intelligence collection opportunity a Tomahawk strike would create. Iranian air defense radars would track every phase of the missile's flight. Russian electronic intelligence ships operating in the region would record the entire engagement. Chinese SIGINT platforms monitoring the Gulf would capture telemetry, radar cross-sections, flight profiles, terminal guidance behavior. Every aspect of the Tomahawk's performance would be studied, cataloged, and shared. This is data that Moscow and Beijing are actively seeking. How does the Tomahawk blend GPS and inertial navigation? What's its actual radar signature in a contested environment? How does it respond to jamming? What are its cruise altitude patterns, its terminal dive angles, its countermeasure vulnerabilities? A single salvo in the Persian Gulf doesn't just solve a tactical problem with Iran. It hands America's peer competitors a blueprint for countering Tomahawks in the next war, whether that's in the Pacific, the Baltics, or the South China Sea. The Navy knows this, and so the missiles stay in their tubes, not because they won't work, but because firing them teaches the wrong audience the wrong lessons. If this changes how you see deterrence strategy, hit like and drop your thoughts below. There's a concept in naval strategy called fleet in being. It's the idea that a fleet doesn't have to engage the enemy to be effective, it just has to exist as a threat, forcing the adversary into defensive postures and strategic paralysis. The US is applying that same logic to its missile arsenal. The Tomahawks don't need to fly to be powerful. They need to remain a permanent, unresolved threat. Right now, Iran has to defend against a strike that could come from anywhere. Submarines lurking off the coast, destroyers operating in the Arabian Sea, potentially even land-based platforms the US hasn't disclosed. The ambiguity is the advantage. The moment those Tomahawks fly, Iran knows exactly what the US is using, how many missiles were expended, and what's left in the inventory. The fog of war clears, and that clarity benefits the defender, not the attacker. Unused missiles generate a more potent form of deterrence than expended ones. Because the threat remains abstract, it remains everywhere. Iran can't ignore it, it can't dismiss it, and it can't stop defending against it. That defensive burden, constant, exhausting, expensive, is exactly what the Navy is counting on. So if the Navy isn't firing Tomahawks, what is it doing? The answer is layered, flexible, and deliberately unpredictable. Carrier-based aviation, electronic warfare, surface action groups that can engage, reposition, and vanish into the broader maritime traffic of the region. These aren't just alternative tools, they're superior tools for a conflict built on ambiguity and persistence. FA-18 Super Hornets and EA-18G Growlers can strike Iranian targets, jam air defense radars, and return to a carrier that's already moved 100 nautical miles from where it launched them. There's no fixed launch signature to exploit, no permanent platform location to target. The carrier group remains mobile, unpredictable, and operationally flexible in ways a missile launch simply isn't. Surface action groups, small flotillas of destroyers and cruisers operating semi-independently, can fire, maneuver, and maintain persistent sensor coverage without locking themselves into a single tactical profile. Electronic warfare creates effects without firing a shot, degrading Iranian radar networks and communications without offering a single piece of forensic intelligence about U.S. capabilities. This isn't about firepower. It's about maintaining operational unpredictability after the first shot is fired. And that's something missiles, once launched, can't provide. The strategic effect of this approach is profound. Iran is being forced into a defensive posture it can't sustain indefinitely. Every coastal defense battery has to remain on alert. Every air defense radar has to keep scanning. Every anti-ship missile position has to stay manned and ready. The longer the standoff continues, the more operationally exhausting it becomes. And while Iran's defensive infrastructure is exposed, active, and vulnerable to surveillance, U.S. Navy assets remain in the shadows. Submarine patrol areas stay classified. Destroyer movements remain unpredictable. The Tomahawk inventory, still untouched, continues to loom over every Iranian strategic calculation. This is how you win a standoff without firing. You make the cost of defense higher than the cost of deterrence. You stretch your adversary's readiness posture until it cracks under its own weight. But this strategy has a critical assumption embedded in it, that deterrence holds indefinitely, that Iran never calls the bluff, that the threat of the weapon remains more powerful than its use. Comment below, is this restraint a strategic masterstroke or a dangerous gamble? There's another dimension to this that goes far beyond the Strait of Hormuz. The Persian Gulf is a theater, but it's not the only audience. Russian naval intelligence units are watching every move the U.S. Navy makes. Chinese PLA Navy analysts are studying every tactical choice, every operational pattern, every capability the U.S. does, or doesn't, reveal. Hormuz isn't just a regional crisis, it's a live-fire laboratory for the next great power conflict. If the U.S. fires Tomahawks at Iranian targets, Beijing learns how to counter them in a Taiwan scenario. If the U.S. relies on carrier aviation, Moscow studies the coordination gaps, the response timelines, the vulnerabilities in that model. Every decision the Navy makes is being reverse-engineered by adversaries, preparing for wars that haven't started yet. This is multi-domain warfare under a global microscope, and the Navy knows it. That's why the restraint isn't just about Iran. It's about preserving capabilities, concealing tactics, and refusing to give peer competitors a preview of American firepower in a high-end fight. The missiles stay holstered not because they're being saved for Iran, but because they're being saved for a conflict where the stakes are existential and the margins for error are zero. But here's the vulnerability in never firing. You may eventually lose the option to fire effectively. If Iran decides the threat is hollow and moves to close the Strait of Hormuz, the Navy faces an impossible choice. Escalate with Tomahawks, exposing everything we've discussed, or accept a strategic failure that undermines deterrence globally. There's also a temporal problem. The longer the missiles remain unfired, the more time Iran has to harden its defenses, reposition assets, and complicate U.S. targeting. Deterrence works when the adversary believes the threat is credible and imminent. But if months turn into years and the Tomahawks never fly, does the threat start to look like hesitation? Some analysts argue the Navy is in a use-it-or-lose-it trap. There's a narrow window where unused firepower equals strategic leverage. And there's a point where it starts to signal indecision, or worse, fear of escalation. The question becomes, is the U.S. preserving deterrence, or is it creating the conditions for a miscalculation? And there's a deeper concern. If the Navy becomes too reluctant to expose Tomahawk signatures in a limited regional conflict, will that hesitation carry over into a great power war, where immediate fire superiority might matter more than long-term ambiguity? Subscribe if you want more breakdowns of the strategies shaping modern naval power. For now, the Tomahawk arsenal in the Persian Gulf serves as a strategic anchor. It's powerful precisely because it remains abstract, holstered, everywhere and nowhere. The Navy has turned restraint into a doctrine and ambiguity into an operational advantage. Iran is forced to defend against a threat it can't see, can't predict, and can't neutralize. That's deterrence at its most effective. But deterrence is a psychological game. It works because the adversary believes you're willing to act. The moment that belief erodes, the moment Iran or another adversary decides the threat is a bluff, the entire structure collapses. And when that happens, the Navy will face a choice it's been avoiding: fire the missiles and lose the intelligence advantage, or hold fire and lose credibility. The bigger question is whether this strategy scales. In an era of great power competition, can the United States afford to keep its most powerful weapons as unused bargaining chips? Or does strategic restraint, over time, become strategic vulnerability, especially when adversaries stop believing the threat is real? The U.S. Navy is betting that the weapon you never fire can be more powerful than the one you do. That uncertainty paralyzes adversaries more effectively than demonstration. It's a gamble that works, until the day it doesn't. And in the Strait of Hormuz, that day may be closer than anyone wants to admit. If you want more deep analysis on military power and global strategy, subscribe to the channel, like the video, and share your perspective in the comments.